Well, I mean, Marvel's not doing anything with Blade. So Sony is exploring further ideas into potential spin-offs and solo movies for Spider-Man related characters that they happen to have the rights to, because obviously we're already getting Venom that has started shooting. They are still developing Black and Silver for Black Cat and Silver Sable, and definitely with Venom, probably with those ones as well. They're not going to get introduced in a Spider-Man movie first. They're just going to start making these movies. But there's another one that they're developing that is the first one that I've kind of gone, that could work, and that would be Morbius, the living vampire. And this is a character I actually know a bit about. I've got some Morbius comics from the 90s. The character's been around longer than that. History's actually kind of funny. I'll go over this real quick. If the moniker living vampire seems a little weird to you, he was created, I think it was in the 70s, but basically at a time where the comics code was still enforced, and it was such that they were not supposed to write about undead horror characters. They weren't supposed to write vampires, zombies, werewolves were off the table. All that stuff, they were not supposed to write about it. So when they wanted to introduce a vampire character, what they did was, rather than have him be the undead back to life, sucking blood from the living, he instead was a scientist who contracted a disease, the symptoms of which were coincidentally identical to vampirism. Pale white skin, can't go out in sun, needs to drink blood. But he never died and came back, so he was a living vampire and therefore allowed under comics code. Yeah, it was kind of dumb when the guy's just functionally a vampire. Although it did actually play into his story a bit, because he was constantly looking for a cure, which was kind of his shtick for a while. He kind of became an anti-hero. They kind of gave him the Punisher's thing with basically his idea going, I have this hunger, I need to feed. If I must feed, if I must kill people by doing it, I will feed off of evil people and criminals. So it was like a cross between Blade and the Punisher a little bit. And he kind of worked. He was kind of nifty. He's had a couple different designs. His original, he kind of had this upturned bat nose. The more recent designs are a little bit sleeker. I kind of prefer them. But this is a character who, even though he originated in a Spider-Man comic and has appeared in Spider-Man related materials, if you watch the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, he was in that, but he does actually not require Spider-Man. Not only in terms of his origin or anything else, he doesn't require, his relationship to Spider-Man isn't what makes him interesting. In fact, at this point, his connection to Spider-Man is so tangential, I was slightly surprised to realize that Sony even nabbed the rights for him when they got Spider-Man. I mean, again, yes, he was introduced in Spider-Man, but, so was Kingpin, technically, but the rights for Kingpin still ended up ultimately being tied up with the Daredevil rights because he was much more associated with that character. Morbius kind of is his own entity at this point. If he has stronger associations at all, it's sort of like with the whole Midnight Suns thing and that whole sort of dark occult corner of Marvel, which is, things like Blade and Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze when he wasn't, embodying Ghost Rider, stuff like that. So it was a little bit surprising for me to realize Sony caught the rights to this. But you know what? It's a property that could actually work as a solo movie. And we don't really have an active vampire franchise right now. I think the last one that got any traction was Twilight, unfortunately. But I think this is a road worth going down. Unfortunately, that enthusiasm is severely tempered by the writers currently assigned to this. Now, it's a writing duo. They've written it's 4 or 5 movies. Let's see if I can remember these now. They wrote the new Power Rangers, Gods of Egypt, The Last Witch Hunter, and most relevant to this, Dracula Untold, the first failed attempt at starting a Universal Monsters universe. So I try not to come down on writers too hard. I know that most writers, unless they are also directors or somehow have built a really good name for themselves, like unless you're somebody like Aaron Sorkin, writers generally are writing on assignment. They they don't really get to craft a story. They get to, figure out the logistics, the nuts and bolts, but by and large, they're working to match a director's vision or off studio notes or on assignment or what have you. So I try not to come down too hard on writers, except at this point, this is 4 badly written movies that these guys are behind. So that, I think I gotta say they are not very good at this. So if you find yourself wondering how'd they get the work, well, Hollywood is weird that way, and people, especially for what is considered to be a more technical kind of profession like writing, because they do again, unless you're dealing with a real artist of in screenwriting terms, your Joss Whedons, your David Mamet's, your Sorkins, as I mentioned, then they really do just most studios see it as a technical exercise. So when they hire writers, they are not looking so much at was the last film they wrote a well-written film. They are looking at, do they deliver on deadline? Do they write to the budget outline that we give them? Do they integrate notes well? And it's stuff like that. If the answer to those things and a few other similar things are yes, they will continue to get assignments regardless of how good the scripts they crank out are. So, yeah, that's unfortunate. It could be saved by the right director. A director with vision who's willing to, come in and say, look, let's reshape the story, do this. And then these guys are just, working under the vision of a director who's good. Because none of the other movies that they've been involved in had very good directors. So, yeah. And again, that's not me saying that they didn't write bad scripts in those cases, but I'm saying maybe those could have been elevated by actually good directors or directors who are still good, in the case of Alex Proyas. But just... And until there is some talent assigned to this that I can look at a track record and not cringe, I can't allow myself to get excited, even though the concept of this character getting his own film, I think would actually work. I just don't like the people they've currently got on it. But I'll be keeping an eye on it. And as far as Sony's spin-off ideas go, they've got the 2 they've got moving forward, and previously scrapped stuff. There was the Sinister Six movie. They were talking about an Aunt May prequel movie. What? So of all of those ideas, the ones that they both moved away from and are actually doing, this one actually makes the most sense to me in terms of doing a solo film. So, yay, I guess. What are your thoughts on this? Morbius, the living vampire, becoming a film. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think that Sony's just going to screw it up even if it is a good idea? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast. That's available on Apple Podcasts. I need to stop calling it iTunes, and Stitcher. And I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast. That is a presentation of the Fire and Water Podcast Network, fireandwaterpodcast.com. And until next time, this council is adjourned.